They thought it was a game. How cute. With their smirks and veiled jabs, their predictable strategies wrapped in faux mystery. They mistook your silence for ignorance, your patience for passivity, your observation for oblivion. But you were never unaware. You were simply waiting, letting them lay their traps, speak their lies, expose their hierarchy of illusion. You watched them with the quiet intensity of someone building a blueprint while pretending to be asleep. And when they moved, you didn't react. You recorded. You calculated. You cataloged the steps of the game they initiated, knowing they were dancing on the surface while you were mapping the ocean beneath them. They played checkers, blindfolded by their own ego, while you carved out an entire psychological opera 3 moves ahead. Because the strongest player is always the one who waits until their silence becomes deafening. They wanted you confused, wanted your emotions tangled in their bait. That's how most players win, not through strategy, but through chaos. They rely on reaction. They live off your confusion. That's the currency of manipulative minds. But you didn't pay in reaction. You paid in restraint. You stopped giving them the luxury of your rage. You stripped them of the one thing they needed to keep control, your attention. You let them believe you were engaged while you were mentally packing your bags. And when they were convinced they had you cornered, when they were too drunk on the scent of their own illusion, that's when you delivered your first lesson. Not in words, not in wrath, in action, in removal, in silence so absolute it shattered their narrative. That wasn't an exit. That was a masterclass in psychological warfare. You didn't leave the game. You erased the board. You showed them that power isn't about domination. It's about discipline. You didn't shout. You didn't scream. You just disappeared from their emotional radar. And the panic that followed, that's what always happens when someone loses control they thought was permanent. They tried to bait you with guilt, with rewrites of history, with petty noise. But you didn't flinch. You didn't justify. You didn't step back into the arena they built out of your past wounds. Because you understood the architecture of their manipulation. You studied its foundation. And once you knew where the walls were weakest, you didn't knock politely. You detonated. Quietly. Precisely. With elegance they could never match. And now they stumble through the ruins of a game they started, confused as to how it collapsed without warning. They underestimated your intelligence, not because they thought you were dumb, but because they were blinded by their own illusion of superiority. They assumed your silence meant defeat, that your lack of response meant surrender. But you were never the servant. They were. Serving your growth, serving your awakening, serving as the final chapter in a book that would be closed and never reread. They thought they were testing you. In reality, they were revealing themselves. And you took notes. You turned their condescension into case studies, their betrayal into syllables of mastery. You became fluent in their dysfunction. And when the moment was right, you didn't clap back. You graduated, walked out mid-performance, left the spotlight, and let the applause echo into nothingness. Now they replay the footage, searching for clues as to when the power shifted. But power doesn't shift. It returns. And it returned to you the moment you stopped trying to win and started watching. This wasn't revenge. It was education. For every time they tried to test your patience, you rewrote the curriculum. For every time they expected you to chase, you redefined movement. You made withdrawal look like mastery. You made letting go look like dominance. You gave them the illusion of victory, so they would expose their entitlement. And once exposed, you gave them nothing. That's what kills a manipulator. The vacuum. The black hole of no response. No drama. No rage. Just the sound of your absence echoing through the corridors they once believed they owned. That's what separates the wise from the wounded. The wounded need closure. The wise are closure. You didn't just teach a lesson. You became one. They wanted attention. They got a dissertation. A full psychological breakdown, written in silence and enforced with distance. Your absence became their mirror, and they hated what they saw. Because in your stillness, their manipulation lost its rhythm. In your clarity, their noise lost volume. You weren't supposed to win like this. You were supposed to break, to beg, to prove you cared. But instead, you vanished with grace. You made detachment look like art. And in doing so, you turned their little game into a stage play. One where the audience left before the climax, and the actors were left performing for empty chairs. You didn't destroy them. You dismantled the illusion they relied on. Your strength was never in your words. It was in your awareness. You learned early that emotion was ammunition in the hands of the wrong people. So you stopped handing them bullets. You felt everything, but you leaked nothing. And that terrified them, because they didn't know where to aim. When someone can't find your weak spot, they start calling you the villain. Let them. Wear it. Own it. Because villains, at least, get to write their own ending. You chose evolution over vengeance, self-respect over validation, silence over spectacle. And now the only sound left is the clattering of their own confusion. You didn't just end the game. You turned the board into a mirror, made them face themselves, and walked away as their reflection shattered. The Masterclass was not about domination. It was about direction. You taught them that attention is earned, not owed. That presence is not a currency to be spent recklessly. You taught them that kindness is not submission, that silence is not weakness. And now, every time they remember you, it stings. Not because you harmed them, but because you healed from them. And healing is the one thing they never prepared for. They wrote their script assuming you'd always play the same role. But you improvised. You rewrote your character arc. You turned pain into poetry and escape into evolution. You didn't have to destroy them to win. You simply outgrew their relevance. And nothing wounds the egocentric more than being outgrown. They charge into the arena with empty weapons, swollen egos, and no concept of the war they're walking into. The immature see power as noise. They mistake volume for dominance, chaos for control, performance for presence. They step onto the battlefield swinging wildly, not realizing they're fighting an opponent who isn't trying to win. They're trying to study. You don't react to noise. You don't flinch at performance. You watch. You let them huff and puff, make their declarations, posture like warriors. Because you know this battle is not about who bleeds first. It's about who understands what's worth bleeding for. The immature pick fights because they're addicted to feeling powerful for a moment. But the powerful never seek conflict. They invite it when it's necessary. And when it arrives, they already know where to strike. They poke at shadows, not knowing what darkness truly holds. They call you weak because you don't bite. They call you passive because you don't explain. But what they fail to see is the trap they're stepping into. You don't reveal your arsenal to people who still think survival is performance. You let them believe they're winning. That's the true test of strength. Restraint. While they swing insults like fists, you're standing in silence, building a kingdom they can't enter. They provoke to provoke, but you respond only with purpose. You aren't avoiding the battle. You're waiting for the silence after their tantrum. That's when the real war begins. And when it does, you won't need theatrics. You won't need validation. You'll dismantle them with decisions, not declarations. You've seen their kind before. Bark without bite, rage without aim, threats that crumble under pressure. They thrive in attention, but die in silence. You've learned not to give them oxygen. Let them circle you with assumptions. Let them draw their conclusions from a version of you they created to soothe their own inadequacies. They believe they can rattle you, break you, expose you. But how do you expose someone who has already stripped away their illusions? Who has already sat with every version of themselves and decided who lives and who doesn't? You're not hiding. They're projecting. And their immature attempts at battle are nothing more than loud confessions of how little they know. Not just about you, but about the terrain they dared to fight on. The immature believe that starting a war makes them strong. But anyone can strike first. It takes discipline to strike last. And you have that discipline. You've buried versions of yourself they've never even met. Versions that would have reacted, that would have taken the bait. But those versions died in the fire you built to become this one. The calm, the cold, the precise. They expect you to flinch, but you are steel now, hardened by betrayal, refined by silence, carved by pain into something they can't comprehend. They swung first, thinking this was a playground. But you've been to hell. You built a house there, and when they show up thinking it's a game, you show them what happens when children walk into storms. Immaturity underestimates silence. They equate it with submission. But silence is your domain. You don't need to speak to be understood. You don't need to shout to be feared. You've learned to let your presence weigh more than their performance. And when they try to provoke you, you let them burn out. You let them exhaust their monologue of delusion. Because your strength is not in reaction, it's in the moment after. When they've said everything, done everything, and you still haven't moved. That's when the fear begins. Not because you were loud, but because you weren't. Because they realize they walked into a depth they cannot swim in. And you haven't even started yet. They come for you like they've done this before, like you're just another target, another person they can drag into their spiral of chaos. But you've evolved past being reactive. You are no longer emotionally available to people who weaponize attention. You are not a mirror for their insecurity. You are not a punching bag for their instability. You are a storm that does not announce itself. A consequence dressed in calm. They started a fight with an illusion. They thought they were confronting the past version of you. But that version no longer exists. And the new one? It doesn't fight to prove. It fights to end. And when it ends, there are no ashes left to mourn. Psychologically, immaturity is obsessed with immediacy. It wants control now, respect now, reaction now. But you've trained yourself to endure delay, to master patience. You don't need the immediate gratification of one-upping someone whose presence isn't even valuable. You've learned that time reveals all, and so you let it. You don't need to speak badly of them. They'll do it to themselves. You don't need to tear them down. They'll collapse under their own weight. You just need to remain what they can't become, composed. That's what cuts them. That's what keeps them awake. They started something for attention. You finish it in silence. And silence, when it's backed by discipline, becomes a language only the strong understand. They'll label you arrogant, cold, disconnected. But labels are the last resort of the powerless. When they can't reach you, they rename you. It's a primitive defense. Redefine the threat so it feels smaller. But their words don't touch you anymore. They don't reach your skin. You've built walls not from bricks, but from clarity, from understanding the nature of false conflict, that most battles aren't about truth, they're about control, and the immature fight not to reveal truth, but to obscure it, to feel powerful. But they forgot that the one who needs power the most is the one who has the least of it. You don't need to win their war. You already won when you refuse to fight it on their terms. In games, the loudest player is rarely the most dangerous. The one who watches, who calculates, who lets the fool play freely. That's the one who controls the outcome. They entered loud, booming voices, wild hands, a parade of presence. They made their grand moves early, throwing energy like currency, seeking dominance through noise. They wanted eyes, wanted reactions. They confused visibility with control. But you stood still. You didn't need to speak. You let them burn through their performance, flail in their flair. Because you understand the first rule of power. Presence isn't proven in volume. It's proven in precision. Let them dance. Let them gloat. Every loud move they make is a breadcrumb. You collect them, quietly, carefully, because you're not here to make noise. You're here to end the game, not in rage, in silence, in one calculated move that flips the board and leaves the loud one questioning if they were ever in control at all. You've seen it before. Those who come in shouting rarely stay standing. They rely on the illusion of confidence. Noise is their armor. They yell to drown out their own doubt. They confuse being noticed with being respected. But respect is not given to the loud. It's given to the composed, the unreadable, the calm one who observes without emotion, who absorbs the whole game without needing to interrupt it. That player, that's you. You don't enter with fire. You enter with foresight. You study angles. You watch patterns. You calculate possibilities. You let them speak their truth while you remain undeciphered. And when the time comes to strike, they won't see it coming because they were too busy hearing their own voice, unaware that your silence was loading. Noise attracts attention, but attention isn't advantage. The fool wants the room to watch him, assuming that makes him powerful. But power doesn't seek the spotlight. It shapes it. You learned early that a loud player reveals their hand too quickly. They telegraph intention. They broadcast strategy. And in that transparency, they write their own ending. Meanwhile, you wait, unassuming, calculating behind a still gaze. While they try to dominate the stage, you write the script. While they fight for applause, you determine the final act. And when the curtain drops, their volume won't matter. The quiet one decided how the play would end. You didn't perform. You engineered. You didn't speak to be heard. You listened to be lethal. The most dangerous player does not flex. They prepare. They let others exhaust themselves on theatrics while they prepare. Every loud player exposes themselves. They reveal need, insecurity, desperation. But you, the silent one, remain unidentifiable. They cannot read what does not move. They cannot anticipate what does not telegraph. And so they grow uncomfortable. They need you to engage, to speak, to react. But you do not. You smile faintly. You nod. But your silence, it disorients them. Because most people crave reaction more than results. And when you give them neither, they lose their rhythm. They flounder. Their ego begins to devour itself. And that's when you move. Not loudly, just finally. Your silence is not passive. It's surgical. You're not quiet because you have nothing to say. You're quiet because what you have to say will change the entire direction of the game. You let them win the small moments, the early rounds, because that's where egos get inflated, and inflated egos make fatal errors. You wait for them to believe they've won. You let them feel untouchable. And right when their guard is lowered, when they're dancing on their own assumed throne, that's when you play. One move. No need for ceremony. No need for show. Just outcome. And as the pieces fall, they'll realize they never knew you, never understood what you were building. And by the time they try to recalibrate, the game is over. People fear what they cannot decode, and you, by remaining unreadable, become fear itself. You do not broadcast intention. You do not shout boundaries. You enforce them, quietly, ruthlessly. That's why the loud player becomes a clown by the end, because they gave away everything trying to prove something. You gave nothing, and gained everything. This is not about cruelty. This is about clarity. You don't need to announce your strategy. You don't need to argue your position. You hold your ground with presence alone. And when that ground finally shifts, you won't even have to move your foot. The entire game will tilt in your favor because you were patient enough to wait while they performed. You gave them rope. They tied the noose. You simply watched it tighten. They called your silence weak, called your composure strange. But now they understand. Now that the pieces are falling, now that their noise has become incoherence. The most dangerous players don't seek to be understood. They seek to understand, and that's what makes you lethal. You let them talk, let them posture, let them expose every insecurity hidden beneath their ego. And you took notes, took time, built a strategy that didn't require volume, just timing. And now, that timing has arrived, and all their talking points can't save them. All their flash can't distract from the fact that you, the quiet one, saw the whole game before the first piece moved. The truly powerful don't announce themselves. They arrive through precision. They execute with calm. And their silence, once mocked, becomes sacred. The loud players crumble not because they weren't capable, but because they wasted energy on optics. You conserved. You converted. You crafted your responses like weapons. Silent, sharp, surgical. And now, there's no need to shout. Your results speak. Your presence weighs. And the loud one, they're silent now, looking around the board, realizing they never controlled it to begin with. The fool played loudly. The master played last. And the one who watched, who waited, who learned, is the one left standing. They wanted applause. You wanted results. They sought validation. You studied patterns. That's the difference between the fool and the architect. One plays for performance, the other plays for permanence. They confused momentum with mastery. But you know better. You understand the rhythm of restraint, the power of measured silence. While they flailed for dominance, you designed their downfall in increments, calculated withdrawals, subtle pivots, quiet boundaries. You let them inflate, let them gloat, because nothing punctures arrogance like its own echo. You didn't need to be seen early because you knew your presence would haunt them late. Now their noise has faded into static, and your precision rings louder than any shout they ever gave. You never aimed to be popular. You aimed to be undeniable. And now, here they are, silent in the shadow of what they never saw coming. You controlled the outcome not through manipulation, but through mastery of yourself, of the dynamic, of the long game. You didn't act on impulse. You watched it erode them. You didn't match their pace. You moved in silence, trusting that delayed power always outlasts premature celebration. They fired every bullet too soon. You sharpened every silence like a blade. And now the scoreboard reads not in cheers, but in clarity. You were never loud, but you were lethal. And as they sit surrounded by the wreckage of their own noise, they'll finally understand. The most dangerous player is the one they never heard coming, the one who watched, the one who waited, the one who delivered not a reaction, but a reckoning